team that I have around me. And we are so honored to be able to serve you. I know many of you are members. Today we're talking about how you could potentially turn 4 units to 400. And there are a few different ways to do it. One of the ways we're going to talk about doing that today is using DSTs, and we're going to get into that in a minute. It's been a busy week. There have been some real major changes. There was a recent court ruling that has caused everybody all throughout the state, every organization, every attorney, everywhere to update to get you what you need. We will have a emergency live stream at 12 o'clock to discuss that. We have two amazing attorneys that are going to be speaking, and so that's just a perfect time to field questions and kind of go over what happened and how people can be compliant and what people need to do. Like if you're in the process of an eviction, with a 3-day notice that potentially could be defective. So all that is coming up at noon, and you can check. If you're watching live right now, just to back up for a second, I want to welcome all of you that are maybe new for the very first time, and just want to welcome you to being an AOA member, or maybe you're not a member at all. Just want to welcome you if you're watching from AOAUSA.com. This is a live stream that's happening on YouTube and X and Facebook as well. But anyway, if you catch it at YouTube, it's kind of easiest to get it there. You can type your question into the chat. If you're watching on AOAUSA.com, you can also put your question into the chat. But after the fact, you can go back and watch this or catch a lot of stuff that you may have missed. And we've had a tenant screening crash course. We did a move-in, move-out crash course. Next week we'll have a one on security deposits. Yeah, and the 24th there'll be 10 ways to keep your tenants happy. So there's things that are coming up in the future. There's things that we've done in the past, and all of it's going to be there. It's either there now or will be on YouTube. So check it out there. And we want to keep you in the know, give you the information that you need. And anyway, so. One thing I'm excited about is the free AOA $1 Million Trade Show that's coming up. And there'll be over 20 different speakers, 20 different seminars that are happening. And there's one of them is going to be called Tools That Wealthy People Use. And that's going to be a great one for how to protect your assets, setting up a trust and protecting yourself as well. And so that's going to be great. There's going to be so many different ones. We're going to have, I won't go into it all, but there's going to be tons of vendors there, new vendors. If you went last year, there'll be still tons of new vendors, new speakers. We're going to do one on midterm rentals, which should be really cool. And anyway, there's so much. I just take a look at the website, see what's there, because there's just too much to even mention right now. And all right, so here we are, really excited. Just want to shout out to H&S Wealth for sponsoring this live stream specifically. And they're focused on 1031 exchange investments for their clients, as well as traditional wealth management. And they've been in business for over 20 years, or for over 20 years they've been working with AOA members, probably 25 years that they've been in business. And our speaker today, he is an LA local, so don't hold that against him. And he has been a real estate and securities professional for over 20 years. And he's a partner to Bob Horning at H&S Wealth, and I'll let him introduce himself more. Bryan, it's great to have you with us.
Thank Thanks so much, Jeff. I appreciate it, and we really value the membership and the relationship with AOA and with you and your dad over the years. So, as Jeff said, my name's Adam Bryan. I'm a securities professional, a real estate professional. I've been in this industry since 2002, which when I do the math means I've been doing it 23 years, and that freaks me out every time I say that out loud. It's pretty much all I've done. I've made a practice of focusing on the 1031 investment world. In 2009, I became a securities professional, which means I have different regulation, different licensing, and DSTs, which is what we'll be talking about today, are regulated through the SEC and FINRA. So they are considered investment securities, but ironically, they're really real estate. That's really the bottom line. They follow different rules about marketing and advertising and disclosure, but really it's a real estate transaction, which all of you know, all of you that are members and own real estate understand. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it today. Our topic, and why should you listen to me aside from having done this for so long? I've been involved, I've actually not gotten an accurate count, I've lost track. Somewhere around 1,000 transactions, somewhere around 500 million in equity or money raised for these types of investments. So I have many, many clients who've been doing this for many, many years. And what I'm going to talk about is how you can turn your, let's say, 4 units into 400. Now, I know that sounds a little gimmicky, but rest assured it's not an investment scheme. It's not a magic trick. It's not a cult. And it's brought to you by our friendly neighborhood IRS. You know what the IRS spells, by the way? A lot of people think it's the Internal Revenue Service. Actually, the IRS, THEIRS, if you write it out, spells theirs. So on that note, what they did back in 1922, I believe before any of us were around, they came up with this concept of an exchange. It technically wasn't a 1031 exchange until later, but it was the same idea. Primarily it was agricultural farmers. They would sell their land that they bought and had a crop perhaps and make a profit. Rather than pay any kind of taxes on that profit, the government dictated if you reinvest your proceeds, your money, into another probably crop of land or investment property, then you don't have to pay taxes on the gain. Really novel concept. It helped stimulate activity. It extended to office buildings and apartments and other things over the years. And it makes a lot of sense economically for the whole country. It keeps transactions happening, so there's liquidity. People are reinvesting their proceeds, putting it back into property. Usually they've made money, so it grows and gets larger. And that's what I imagine many of you have done over the years. But in 2004, there was a revenue ruling by the IRS, a second significant change to the 1031. All the basic 1031 rules stayed the same. You sell your property, you have to reinvest equal or greater value, whatever you buy. They gave you in the 80s a time limit, 45 days to identify from the close of your escrow, and 180 days to close escrow on the new purchase. But in 2004, there was another significant change. A group of investment people got together and said, why can't we pool each individual party that has, let's say, 4 units, let's say $1 million, and put them together, put their money together to buy a much larger property, 400 units, $100 million property. Well, it turns out that we've solved the mystery of the universe. Bigger is better. And why is that? Because when you think about it, if you have 4 units and you lose a tenant, what that means is 25% of your revenue is gone until you replace that tenant, and you probably have some expenses before you do, painting, carpet, what have you. When you have 400 units and you lose a tenant, it's a Tuesday. It's not only not a bad thing, not only does it not impact your cash flow, it's treated, if you're managing properly, as an opportunity, because generally those people were paying less than market rates. So you're able to keep moving rents up. When you're buying 100 million bigger property than what you owned, you are probably not in the state of California. It's very expensive real estate here. It tends to not cash flow very well, and I don't need to tell you about the hassles of regulation and rent control and all the code violation issues. All of that, for the most part, goes away when you're in the growing part of the country, and that is the southeast of the United States. Call it from Washington, D.C. down through Georgia, over to Florida, even Texas. That's where jobs and that's where people are moving in this country. And that's where you want to be for real estate for the most part. When you're in a market like Los Angeles or New York or San Francisco, it's what's called infill. You have to knock something over to build something. That's one of the reasons that the real estate is so expensive. When you're in another market, a small market, there's a lot of land around you and you can develop and build. That means the value is less intrinsic for the existing real estate. So you want to be in that line between there's growth, there's opportunity, there's land to build, but not easily, not cheaply. And that's where a lot of these DST properties are. While I said 4 to 400 because of the alliteration, you can actually buy 2 or 3 with $1 million or less of these different DST properties, giving you 1,200 units instead of 4 units. Once again, you lose a tenant in each building. It's not only not a bad thing, it's an opportunity. Because we're out of state, because we're dealing with what's called institutional real estate, $50 to $100 million assets, you're not going to be managing them anymore. And that's probably the biggest benefit that a lot of my clients and a lot of you members will see from a DST. You're out of the property ownership and management business. You still own real estate, but you don't have to deal with the tenants or the city or the county or any of the vendors. All of that's handled by a professional management team that does this for a living. And you know, they run it as a business, which it is a business, and it's a good thing, because think about some of your tenants. I'm talking to you. You have one, I'm sure, that's a sweet little old lady who doesn't call much and pays her rent on time, and she's paying $500 a month for a 2-bedroom in Sherman Oaks. That's a very common phenomenon, so don't feel that you're alone. Well, when you run it as a business, you won't see that. You'll see properties that are daily keeping track of what market rental rates are. And the reason that's so important is the value of your real estate. Not only are you cash flowing better with higher rents, or market rents, I should say, but the value of the property becomes inherently more substantial because real estate's valued based on the income it produces. So let's talk about this DST, and if we can bring up the PowerPoint, guys. There we go. So as I mentioned, these are sold as securities. They can't be generally advertised or promoted, and that's why you might not have heard of one of these before. Not uncommon for my clients to never have come across a DST. About 1 in 10 people I talk to generally is familiar with it. There we are. Alrighty, sorry about that. It's not allowed to be generally solicited or advertised. I can educate people and talk about them, but a specific offering, I need to know you, we need to make sure it's suitable for you, and so forth. Let's take a look at what some of these are. Not sure if I'm controlling it or they are. Okay. Before you could invest in one of these, obviously you have to sell your real estate. You could put in straight cash investment, but they really are designed for exchangers, 1031 exchangers. And what are they? They can be any kind of real estate. As I talked about earlier, they're apartment buildings, office buildings, retail, student housing, senior living facilities, all kinds of things. And they are, again, institutional in nature. Institution means big companies, hedge funds, insurance companies usually own these. Individual people do not. But it's an opportunity for the small individual investor to co-own a piece of that distribution center that's tenanted by Amazon, or those 300, 400, 500 unit buildings that you see there that are luxury buildings. And I'll talk about why that is. So what is it exactly? A DST is simply a legal structure. It's a way to own the real estate. You're all probably familiar with LLCs that limit your liability, or partnerships, or REITs, R-E-I-T, real estate investment trusts. It's none of those things. although it's very similar to them. It protects you. In other words, your liability owning this DST is not exceeded by what you invested in the DST. They cannot locate you and come after your other wealth. So like an LLC, you're protected. It's a partnership, but you're like a limited partner. You're not making decisions, and you're not in partnership with any of the other co-owners. In fact, you don't even know who they are. The sponsor company coordinates everything and is the trustee of this trust. So you simply co-own a piece of it, just like any other stock, for example, where you don't know the other owners of the shares of the company. But it's not a stock. It's really truly like owning a fractional piece of real estate. A sponsor is an investment company, a management company. They will go out and scour the country for these really high quality buildings. They'll do the due diligence. They will use their own money to acquire the property in the name of a newly created DST, Delaware Statutory Trust. That trust generally will only own that one property. In other words, it's not a REIT, not a stock. It's a pool of properties. It's a single asset. Then they now own the property. They collect the cash flow, they manage it, and when they feel the time is right, they will bring in investors to pull their capital out and let them go about their business of managing and acquiring another property. Meanwhile, the ownership is taken over by the individual investors. It's important to note that you're not in partnership. You're simply a co-owner. There is a single owner or borrower on the deeded real estate, for example. If you look at it that way, it's as if the entity owns the property and then you as the investor own a piece of the entity, your fractional share. Oftentimes there's leverage or debt. Obviously we're going through a little higher period of time where we've had interest rates go up. There's now talk about whether they'll come down or not. We'll see what happens with the Fed and with tariffs and inflation and so forth. Personally, I don't see a big change. We've changed a little bit since last year. Prices are up very slightly. Transactional volumes are increasing, and that's promising. More people are finally, what I would argue, is accepting, people are used to 3% interest rates, and now suddenly 6 and 7 seems like it's through the roof, when in fact 5 or 6 is pretty average. So most likely things aren't going to change too much in the near term. When they are leveraged acquisitions, meaning that they're using a loan, the trust is the borrower. Now the signature signed by the trustee of the trust, again, that's the sponsor. But the way that it's structured, the borrower is the trust then has members, and you can have up to 499 members in a DST. Usually it's more like a few hundred. The reason that's important is because they have very low minimums, so you're able to invest in multiple DSTs and again increase your 400 to maybe 1,200 units or what have you. The sponsor wants to get their equity out, so they sell off interest through financial advisors, generally not traditional ones, although some do. Very few around the country, like myself, focus and specialize in it. But you have to have a relationship with a financial advisor, and then you can learn about what DSTs are available. Your share of ownership, let me use simple math. It's a $100 million property with no loan, and you invest $1 million. So that's 1%. Your 1% pro rata contribution entitles you to 1% of the property. It's as if you literally own 1% of the property because you own 1% of the DST, which solely owns that one property. That's all it does. That means that the net distributable cash flow every month, 1% of it is yours. If you are depreciating your property as you should be, 1% of the expenses and the improvement of the building, you can depreciate. That's your 1%. Some of you are familiar with your Schedule E on your tax return, and the same thing happens with the DST. Goes right to the Schedule E. When the property sells, hopefully makes a nice profit, 1% of any profit is yours. You're entitled to. And then you're back to whether or not you want to do another 1031 exchange. But it's pro rata ownership. You put in your share, you get your share back. And that's very important because other types of investments and partnerships will dilute you, will not give you your share of everything. But the IRS, in the goodness of their hearts, wanted it to be structured this way. They insisted on it, in fact, so that that's how you'll know that you're getting your share of your DST property or properties. Who manages it? Again, these sponsor companies I talked about are the trustee of the trust. They make the decisions. You can't have several hundred people own a piece of real estate and then have a vote whether or not to sell or whether or not to get a new property manager or any of the things you can imagine that happen with a piece of real estate, especially of that size. You need a professional who's going to take care of it. And the good news is that allows for you to exit the property management, the daily headaches, the phone calls, the diapers in the toilet, the quit notices that you have to do, and unlawful detainers that I guess now have to be properly structured with 3 days. All of that goes away. And some would argue that's the best thing about a DST, that you don't have to manage it or take care of it. And some would argue it's the worst thing about a DST. You don't get to make the decisions. You're not hiring the vendors. You're not deciding when to sell or whether to rearrange the financing and whatnot. All of those decisions you're letting go of. And usually what that means is my typical client, the typical investor in a DST, is 70, 75 years old or older. They want to get out of the property management. But when you're that age, you tend to have highly appreciated real estate. And your other option is to pay the tax, which I haven't addressed yet, but briefly, whatever profit you make on your sale of real estate, if you are not doing a 1031, or even if you're just pulling some money out of the transaction and doing a partial 1031, it's going to be taxed at the federal and state level. It adds up to about a third. About $1 million, you'd have about $333,000 in taxes. Everybody's taxes are different and their situation's different, but that's generally where it comes from. Essentially, it'd be about 20% federal capital gains tax. That is not changed in the new tax bill that's about to be signed. There's 3.8% Medicare tax, also staying in effect. When you've depreciated your property over time, you got the benefit of that depreciation. You were able to avoid taxation on your income, but they recapture it when you sell if you don't exchange. And that's at a 25% rate, whatever you've depreciated. And that's just the federal government. State of California, depending on the value of what you sold, you're looking at up to 13.3%. They just treat any income or capital gain as income in California. When you add up all those taxes, you end up with a little over a third for most people, some a little less, some a bit more. That's why you're recommended almost always to do an exchange unless you need liquid cash or capital, in which case I would encourage you to make sure you have sufficient reserves, and maybe if there's leftover funds, do an exchange, or maybe you don't need that liquid cash anyway. After all, it's been tied up in real estate for all these years. You're not changing that. That's the way it's just going to continue to be in your DST or DSTs, plural. When it sells, and I mentioned it's the decision of the sponsor, it's usually 6 to 8 years. It's a little bit of crystal ball time. I can't tell you when it will sell because it depends on market conditions. But most real estate cycles, if you buy it at this point, you know, within 5 to 10 years, you're going to go full cycle, maximize the income you can get, and it'll trigger the right time to market and sell the property. But the sponsor will make that decision. And once again, these are very experienced, established companies that have done this many times over. They're going to pick the right time. When they sell, you have the option of having your funds go back to an accommodator. That's required, as you know, for a 1031 exchange. If not, call me and I'll explain it. And then you can do another 1031 exchange. You can go back to owning your own real estate if you chose. You can buy another DST. And I can assure you that at least the sponsors I deal with who've done this many times over, they're motivated to do a good job, not just to earn their fee, and of course they're earning a fee, they essentially get the listing commission. They want you to reinvest in their next DST. You're not obligated to, but if they've done a good job, particularly if you've made some money, you're most likely going to stay with that sponsor, and they're very aware of that. All the same options exist as if, just like when you sold that 4-unit building, now you're selling a DST interest, but you can 1031 exchange into whatever you want. Or of course you can pull the cash out and pay all those taxes if it makes sense for you and your family. Big question I get, How do I get out early? Before that 6 to 8 years, people want to know if they're trapped in this. Well, technically, you're not any more trapped in this investment than you are any other real estate. All real estate is considered illiquid. There's no button you can push on Ameritrade and sell it overnight based on the bid and the ask. You have to list it, negotiate with buyers, and sell. DST is the same thing. If you're selling your DST interest early, though, before the whole property sells, now there's not that many people that are even aware of this that are necessarily going to be a market. So it's very illiquid in that sense. Every structured DST is set up so that the sponsor will notify the other co-owners in the same property that you're in, that you're trying to sell. You can sell all or a portion of it, by the way. And they'll notify those other owners that there's an investor who wants to minimize or eliminate their position. Are you interested in growing yours? These are all 1031 real estate people for the most part. They're all accredited investors. And I should mention you have to be a high net worth or accredited investor to be in a DST. It just means $1 million in assets or greater exclusive of your residence, or 200,000 or 300,000 in income if you're single or married. Bottom line though, people have been able to exit these. It's not recommended. I always tell folks to plan on being in it for the long haul. I was in this business during the Great Recession when a lot of real estate, DSTs included, lost some value. The best thing is generally to ride it out, hold on, and it'll come back. And that is what happened. So can you do it? You can, and if you're able to find a buyer and agree to a price, it's actually a pretty easy transaction because there's no loan assumption, title, or escrow. It's almost just a piece of paper being consigned and funds moving to your accommodator or to your bank account. So yes, you can exit early, but don't assume it'll be easy. Certainly don't think of it as a parking vehicle. Plan on being in it for the long haul, ideally. And if something happens, an emergency, God forbid, or a kid going to college, then you've always got that option to try to sell your interest. Oh, I went ahead too many. Sorry, folks. I think it's my fingers. Yeah, that's the one. Last note. Remember some key things. Number one, the sponsors' track record and who they are. You know, they're managing your money. They're taking care of it. I'm not. I'm more of a buyer's agent, selecting the right properties and the right sponsors for you and working with you. But you want one who's been around, a company that's done this. In fact, has done this ideally full cycle many times. They put together an offering, raised the money, operated the property for a number of years, and sold it. And what was their track record? What was the returns? For the sponsors I deal with, there's about 60 nationwide that are active. I only work with about 12 and really only about 8 or 10 on a regular basis because I know these folks, because they have this track record that's very positive. They've been doing this 20, 25, 50 years in some cases. That's really important, but you got to keep that in mind. The second thing is that it's real estate. Now, when it comes to real estate, I could do a whole seminar on all different types of assets and real estate because, again, DSTs are just different kinds of properties. But I'll be brief, and that is that in our practice, we focus on Class A or high-end or new luxury type apartment buildings. They have held up the best through the recession. They have held up the best through COVID because many of those higher income earning young tenants were able to work remotely, which was a surprise to me and a very positive surprise because I did not expect COVID to happen. The other asset class, not only did it outperform during the recession all other investment property, it actually improved, it increased. During the Great Recession, their typical net operating income on those properties, and that is self-storage. When the economy is down, people get roommates, people move back in with mom, and you got 2 couches where you only have room for 1. You have to put your stuff somewhere. Unfortunately, a lot of displaced people in the recession meant that a lot of these units were rented to store things. And in a good economy, people have a lot of stuff. It's interesting when you learn about this industry. Obviously, it's very easy to manage. About 1 in 10 households in the United States has a storage unit. About 15% of the units are occupied by small businesses that don't need a warehouse, but they need a 10 by 20 foot space. So it's a good business, easy to manage, highly automated, and it's done very well both in bad times and good, in fact even better in bad times. That's what we're going to focus you on. I avoid retail, triple net type properties office properties, self-storage is the way to go, and multifamily. By the way, Class A multifamily, again, not lower income. The bottom line is, in a recession, everybody gets impacted, but it tends to trickle up, meaning the folks at the higher end of the income bracket get impacted and affected, but it's the folks at the bottom that get it first, unfortunately. And when it's a pandemic, I can now tell you from experience, people that are hair cutters and waiters and waitresses and factory workers, well, they can't do that work from their apartment, and if they can't go into work, you've got a real problem, not to mention the federal government won't let you evict them for lack of payment. Didn't turn out to be much of a problem for the Class A apartments, and that's another reason we stick with them. Last thing is what we all learned about real estate when mom or dad taught us about it: location, the 3 golden rules. Location, location, I always forget that third one. You want to be in a place that's growing. You don't want to be in a place where it's stagnant or even getting smaller, like we've seen in the middle of the country. You want to be careful of boom and bust markets. You want to be careful of a lot of cheap dirt, as I like to say, where it's easy to build competing product. So there is that fine line of where's an ideal spot, and as I mentioned earlier, it's really right now in the southeast of the country. Jobs are going there, companies are going there, young people are going there, older people are going there. Some people are leaving California, New York, major markets, to move to these areas. And again, they tend to have much more tax-friendly, sometimes no income tax, and landlord-friendly laws and regulations. So a lot of information thrown at you. If you have questions, you can give me a call. It's really about my job is to help you achieve your goals. That's the way I look at it. If not doing an exchange or doing an exchange but not doing a DST with me is the best thing for you, then that's what I'm all for. I mean that sincerely. I want folks to do what I would do or what I'd recommend for my family to do. So with that, I think you've seen we have chat boxes and you have ways that you can ask questions, and happy to address them. If you don't want to call me later, we can do it right now live and everybody benefits.
All right, thank you, Adam, so much for sharing with us. And
Right? Yes, Alan B. There he is. Alan, excellent question. The federal government, really back in the 1950s, decided that it was too complicated to figure out what the cost basis was of assets for heirs. When you pass away, your children inherit your stock or your properties. Well, what was their cost basis? They didn't buy it. You did before you died, right? Same thing with your real estate. It was so complicated that the IRS figured they'd spend more time trying to figure that out than collecting tax dollars. So they said, let's wipe the slate clean. Let's just call it a step up in basis. That's the technical term or the term of art, which means the value of the asset the day of your passing is effectively the cost basis for your heirs. So let me put it another way. You die, you have $1 million property that you bought for $100,000. You had $900,000 in gain. But the good news is you passed away. When you passed away, your heirs inherit that property. That $100,000 cost basis and that $900,000 tax dies with you. Their cost basis is the value of the property the day of your passing, which is, in this example, $1 million. Let's say they turn around and sell that property the next day. Hopefully they bury you first. When that happens, between closing costs and commissions, they're actually going to have $1 million cost basis and a sale of $1 million that nets them about $950,000. Hence, there's no capital gain. They don't need to do a 1031 exchange. They can if they choose to, but there's no tax liability. That's what a step up in basis means, and it applies to all your assets up to, I think it's now going to be a $22 million estate. If you're above that, then the estate tax will kick in. But for most folks below that, their heirs receive that step up in basis. The question was, what happens when you die to your DST? The same thing. They will receive a step up in basis. Obviously, the checking account for the monthly deposits will change. The distributions, I forgot to mention, they're around 4.5% net cash on cash. So you've been receiving on $1 million about $45,000 a year, and then deducting expenses from that, just like you do now. So it's tax sheltered. Well, when you pass, your heir inherits the property, they change the ownership documents, the bank account now goes to them, and they have the option to sell or try to sell early or wait till it's ideal and sell when the whole property sells. And again, when that happens, they probably will have very little or no capital gain, depending on how much it's appreciated, and they can move on from there.
Great. And another tax question. You mentioned the monthly deposits that are being made to their account. So there's the cash flow that's happening. Nothing's being sold, but there's that income coming in. How do they report that at the end of the year?
Yeah, great question. It's passive income. It's not treated as active income, so it goes on the form with your dividend income and others. But it's sheltered because it's real estate. All of us know one of the big benefits of owning real estate is the ability to depreciate the property, deduct expenses, shelter, as they say, that income. That will continue in a DST. It's no different. It is not a dividend. You do not receive a K1 like you might in your partnerships. You get a 1099 for the gross income that you received. It is distributed monthly. And typically a sponsor company will complete a budget. They know where the income's at and the vacancy's at and so the rents are at and so forth. They'll project out what they think it'll be for the year, and they will have a fixed distribution rate, as I said, around 4.5% right now. Not terribly high, but most people in LA are getting a net of around 2% or 3%. So it's actually going to be a net improvement for many investors. You'll report it along with your other income to the state and to the feds, and the net amount will be taxed at whatever your traditional tax rate is.
Great. And one other question, just on the risk element, what places do you need to look for risk with this type of asset?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite questions because I am extremely risk adverse. Everything that we do is dictated by really three principles. Capital preservation, we don't want people to lose their money. Income, cash flow, because income's king, right? Cash flow is king. People need that income. And appreciation. That's really important as well, but less important, if you will. That's why it's third. What are the risks? The risks are the same as any other real estate. Now, I could argue that they're mitigated and a little bit less risk, just like I mentioned where you lose one tenant in a four-unit building, you've lost 25% of your income. Well, in 400 units, it's meaningless. But there is risk. One of the biggest issues that we see that impacts a property, obviously a recession has an impact, just because folks are losing jobs, rents tend to go down. Interestingly, in this inflationary period we've been for the last year and a half, it's almost unprecedented in U.S. history. The combination and the confluence of high inflation, which has actually dictated very high rents. I'm speaking nationwide, but LA is no different. About 40% of the inflation we've seen in the last year and a half has come from housing, from rent and equivalent rent for mortgages. So a lot of it's been beneficial. But when there's a huge downturn, eventually, as we know, rents will drop, sales transactions will drop, prices may come down. So that's a concern. Building is a concern. Again, in LA, it's really non-existent in the sense that you don't have to worry about a new building being built next to you. It's almost impossible. But in other markets, when new units come online, new buildings are built, they're going to try to draw from that same tenant pool, and that may decrease your occupancy and maybe your rents, or you have to give concessions, a 1 month free, for example, to get a new tenant. The other one may surprise you. The other big the other big risk factor that I see that's not uncommon, and that is tax appraisal. In LA, we're very comfortable and familiar with our Prop 13, and our property taxes are relatively low, believe it or not, even though our state income taxes are extremely high. But if you look at a state like Texas or Florida or Tennessee, where there is no income tax, everybody loves that, and it sounds great, and it does bring people to move there and businesses. But you have to remember, they still have stoplights and firemen. They still have to pay for all of that. One of the ways they do that is through much higher tax bills, property tax bills. And as the assessments come in over this 6 to 8 year hold, you can't know what you'll be assessed in 3 or 4 or 5 years. There's simply no way to know until you are. Sometimes the budget, the anticipated tax, is going to be much lower than the actual tax assessment. That's happened in some markets. And so that's a risk. The things that people worry about, frankly, from a risk factor perspective, particularly in the South, is weather, is hurricanes and flooding. Interestingly, that's kind of the least of your concerns. I hate to be callous, but for one thing, these properties are built to withstand 500-mile-an-hour winds, at least the apartment buildings that I represent, that I have my investors in. They're not really impacted by that. Flooding is an issue. That's always an issue, but these properties tend to be pretty far from the coast where the waters never reach. And most importantly, they're highly, highly insured, not only for replacement value, meaning the insurance company will replace any damage, but for rental income loss. So because tenants had to move out, let's say there was flooding and somehow reached 2 miles inland, if that happened, the insurance company is going to pay that rent that you would have otherwise collected. So things like weather, I know people worry about, but it's not your main concern. Actually, the bigger concern would be building in the market.
Great. And then, with the sponsor company, it seems like that would be a risk if they're not, if you were to get a bad sponsor company, it seems like that would be a risk. Is that right?
Because that sponsor company, maybe they didn't know what I just shared with you about property taxes. Believe it or not, somebody that's new at this, that might be a lesson for them. You don't want to be the guinea pig for that sponsor. You want someone who's done this before, who knows what to look for. Make sure that all the studies and due diligence that's completed before you buy it has been done by third parties. That's another important thing with the sponsor. You don't want them doing the appraisal. You want a separate third party doing the appraisal to tell you what this property's worth. So yeah, an experienced sponsor is going to mitigate a lot of the traditional risks.
Mm-hmm. And then Alan had a follow-up question on the step up in basis point that you made there. So, and he wrote, so if his heirs sell 5 years later, their decrease is their capital gain?
Exactly. So the cost basis for the heir is the value of the property as of the day of your passing, and the sponsor can help you establish what that is. Let's say they hold it for another 5 years and it goes up 10% from there, which would be fine, which would be great. Yes, your heirs would then have about a 10% increase in value, and their capital gain would be based on just that increase, because they're now an owner. It's just a question of what their cost basis is when you can compare it to the eventual sale price to figure out the capital gain. What often will happen is what you just described, and the heirs sell the property. There's very little tax because there's been some appreciation, and they take the money and run, so to speak. Sometimes they stay in the DST because they like the investment, they like the management fee and all those good things I've talked about.
Cool. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. We see your phone number, we see your contact information that's there, but also you're going to be speaking at the AOA trade show, isn't that right?
Yeah, I get to have a live audience. Love you folks in the room, but I actually enjoy talking to a group and seeing the person asking questions. So we've been doing this for many years. I'll be doing a power talk about 10 in the morning, I believe, and you'll be able to come in and ask me questions, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. Thanks for reminding me of that.
Yeah, and for those of you that haven't ever been to a trade show, a power talk is a 20-minute talk. We actually have 4 stages at the trade show, 2 big stages where there's about 400 to 600 seats in each, for each of those stages, then 2 smaller ones where there's about 200 chairs. So there's 40-minute talks, and then there's the 20-minute power talk. So when you look at the schedule, because there's 4 different schedules, you'll see like there's multiple tabs. There's a whole lot going on, and it is just a real wealth of information. And again, we want to encourage you to come out to the trade show. It's free. Bring a friend. For those of you that may know someone who's not an AOA member, they're going to get a free 6-month membership. We don't take payment information or anything. It's really, really full access with no strings attached. And anyway, so thanks again, everybody. Hopefully we'll see you at the trade show in Long Beach on August 20th. And again, Adam, thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it.
All right, we'll see you guys later.